Imagine one morning you wake up in Europe, but the first thing you see is not the familiar patchwork of nation-states. Instead, before your eyes stretches a single continuous mass of power, flowing like a vast imperial cloak embracing the Mediterranean, reaching into northern Europe, sliding across the Middle East, touching North Africa. On the flagpole in the central square, there is no tricolor, no modern emblem. There stands the eagle, the laurel wreath, and a line of Latin that every child can read as easily as the alphabet. The Roman Empire never fell. It is still here, and the question is no longer how great Rome once was, but what the world would look like today if that machinery of power were still running, still breathing, still expanding, still controlling. To answer that, we must step into the core of Rome itself. Rome was never just legions and conquests. Rome was an operating system. It was a way of governing territory, collecting taxes, building roads, organizing law, granting citizenship, and absorbing different peoples into a shared narrative. If that operating system had not crashed at a decisive moment, if civil wars had not torn apart its center, if its borders had not fractured into pieces, then Rome might have achieved what every superpower longs for, turning its world into a lasting order, so stable that people forget there was ever another option. In that world, you would hear sounds that feel familiar yet strange. In cafes, people speak a form of Latin that has evolved, much like historical Latin gave birth to Italian, Spanish, and French. But here, instead of splitting into national languages, it has been standardized by the state over centuries, becoming a unified administrative tongue, like a great river forbidden to branch. You might still hear Celtic in rural hills, Germanic echoes in the north, Arabic tones in southern provinces. Yet for paperwork, for school, for joining the state apparatus, you must speak the language of the empire. That unity becomes a formidable soft power. One language, one law, one road system, one shared understanding of what it means to be a citizen. When citizen becomes an identity greater than belonging to a small kingdom, the course of European history shifts. The medieval era of fragmented feudal lords might never unfold as we know it. A surviving Rome would be allergic to fragmentation. It would despise gray zones that refuse taxation, resent autonomous fortresses outside the system. Wherever there is a Roman road, there are patrols, toll stations, record-keeping officials, lawyers debating statutes. The space for local warlords to grow into independent nations would be squeezed from the beginning. Yet the world is never shaped by one force alone. If Rome survived, it would have to endure the tides that swept real history: religion, plagues, climate shifts, technology, rival empires. The most fascinating question is not whether Rome survives, but how it transforms to do so. A Rome alive today cannot be the ancient original. It must be a Rome that has shed its skin hundreds of times, surviving not by brute strength alone, but by knowing when to change. Consider religion first. In real history, Christianity was not merely faith. It restructured power. The church became a transnational network, preserving knowledge and moral authority in chaotic times. But if Rome never collapsed, the church might have evolved as an organ of the empire rather than a counterweight. Rome would absorb Christianity in a Roman way, turning it into a pillar of legitimacy, weaving it into law, adjusting doctrine where necessary, and above all, ensuring spiritual authority never separates from administrative authority. Senate and church would function like interlocking gears, stabilizing the imperial machine. If that were so, Europe's religious wars might not erupt in the same way. Reform movements could be suppressed swiftly or absorbed through controlled compromise, allowing ritual diversity while preserving unity of power and taxation. Rome was pragmatic. It tolerated countless local gods as long as taxes were paid and rebellion avoided. In a modern context, it might develop a model of regulated pluralism, personal freedom of belief, but major religious institutions firmly contained within imperial law. Then comes a force more disruptive than doctrine: technology. In real history, competition among European states accelerated scientific, military, and maritime revolutions. One nation invents a better cannon, another must respond. One finds a new trade route, others rush after it. But under a unified empire, that competitive engine changes. Some might assume progress slows, yet Rome would possess another, but perhaps more relentless engine: governance. To manage vast territory efficiently, it would require measurement, statistics, standardization, optimized logistics, efficient taxation. A technocratic revolution could emerge not from rivalry, but from administrative necessity. Imagine the Industrial Revolution unfolding under a technocratic Rome. Railways would not sprout from competing private firms, but from imperial decree, linking provinces to the capital like arteries to a heart. Rail gauges standardized, labor laws unified, transport taxes harmonized. The result would be a massive infrastructural web fanning outward, enabling troops, goods, and ideas to move with unnerving speed. Boarding a train in Londinium and disembarking in Alexandria would feel like traveling between provinces, not crossing foreign lands. This reshapes the age of exploration. Without rival European nation-states racing for colonies, overseas expansion would look different. Rome might still sail outward, driven by trade and ambition, but expansion would mean provincialization rather than scattered overseas empires. The New World could become new provinces, complete with governors, roads, tax systems, and gradual assimilation. It might appear more orderly, yet darker in its efficiency. Instead of fragmented colonial competition, indigenous cultures would face a single, patient, consistent imperial machine. Rivals would still arise. A Rome that survives to the present must have faced and endured powerful Eastern civilizations, steppe empires, Islamic dynasties, and modern states. Global politics might revolve around a long-standing balance between Rome and an East Asian or Eurasian continental bloc. A Cold War not of capitalism and communism, but of imperial order against rival civilizational systems. Under such pressure, Rome would innovate militarily. The modern Roman army would not resemble ancient legions in iron armor, yet the spirit of the legion would persist. Discipline, unit cohesion, standardization. Rome would embrace drones as once it embraced stone roads, satellites as living maps, data as modern tax ledgers. Surveillance would be precise and expansive. Citizens would enjoy robust infrastructure, stable welfare, and high security in exchange for a state that knows where they are, where they travel, what they contribute. At that point, freedom becomes the blade twisting at the heart of the story. Rome was designed to love order more than liberty in the modern sense. It had law courts, citizenship, debate, but all served the machine. Modern concepts of universal human rights and free speech partly grew from struggles against absolute authority. If Rome endured, revolutions might still occur, but they would confront a state skilled at controlled concession. Picture a Roman revolution, unlike the French one, not the overthrow of a king, but constitutional reform of an empire. An elected senate, an emperor as symbolic figure, provincial representation strengthened, citizenship broadened. Rome historically expanded citizenship to bind territories. A modern version might become an imperial federation, superstate, retaining central strength while granting representation. Such adaptation could prevent collapse by transforming empire into something beyond the classical model. Even democratized, Rome's legacy would shape society deeply. Education would emphasize civic duty from childhood, law, taxation, history, as the story of order triumphing over chaos. Public symbols would saturate daily life. Ceremonies, oaths, commemorations reinforce the idea that you are a link in a vast chain. Extreme individualism might struggle to flourish. Instead, a powerful civic collectivism would dominate, confident and sometimes cold. Economically, the Mediterranean remaining Rome's internal sea would reorganize global trade. Major ports might bear ancient names revitalized as mega-hubs: Ostia, Alexandria, Carthage, Massilia, Byzantium. A modern denarius, stabilized by imperial taxation, could anchor global markets. With unified contract law and a massive internal market, Rome could become the largest production and consumption engine on Earth, a superunion with far more centralized authority, Geopolitically, dependent European alliances like NATO or the European Union might never form. Rome itself would be the alliance. The hottest borders would lie not between former European rivals, but along imperial edges touching other civilizations. Frontier provinces would be heavily secured, heavily administered, zones of tension where order meets difference. Fewer intra-European wars perhaps, but more enduring border conflicts. In daily life, the empire would feel omnipresent. Administrative systems unified, procedures standardized. Moving between provinces would not require rebuilding identity from scratch. Convenience would be immense, yet the state would feel everywhere. Cameras at intersections, identity checks at post offices, civic curricula in schools. Protection paired with measurement. Popular culture would also transform. Instead of multiple competing national narratives, a dominant imperial story would overshadow regional ones. Local traditions persist, but above them towers the Roman narrative of law, order, citizenship, continuity. Blockbuster films might celebrate engineers bridging continents, judges combating corruption, legions defending frontiers. Heroes are those who make the system function, those who defy it. By the 21st century of this alternate world, a paradox emerges. An empire surviving 2 millennia cannot rely solely on force. It must cultivate consent. It must persuade the majority that life inside the empire is better than outside. That is the most formidable power of all, not coercion, but belonging. Rome might feel like a vast, warm, orderly home. Yet one might still glance at the window and wonder whether departure is truly possible. Imagine a night in Rome, still the capital, or perhaps a vast new Rome. Ancient structures encased in glass and steel, part museum, part nerve center of power. Streets orderly, metro lines humming, digital billboards flashing slogans about good citizenship. In one corner, students debate provincial autonomy and surveillance limits. In another, a family from a distant frontier province holds fresh citizenship papers, stepping into stability. Both scenes coexist as two faces of the same coin. If the Roman Empire still existed today, the world might be calmer at its center, yet more tense at its edges. Fewer wars among European states, more friction between order and liberty, progress driven by technocratic efficiency rather than explosive rivalry. Above all, humanity would live under a question that never fully fades. Is dwelling within a 2,000-year-old order a blessing, or the most beautiful cage ever built? Picture a modern Roman coin, gleaming, still marked with a laurel wreath. One side engraved with the symbol of order. On the other, a small inscription, "Freedom is never automatic." In such a world, that inscription might be controversial, yet it would remain worth asking. Because what is most unsettling is not that an empire endures, but that it endures so long people forget they once had the power to imagine something else.